The ceramic coffee mug resting on the oak kitchen counter had gone completely cold, its faint morning steam long vanished, leaving behind a dark, stagnant liquid. I noticed it the way I have noticed most things over the past 2 years. Slowly, distantly, as if the information had to travel across a vast, invisible chasm before reaching my awareness. My left hand moved instinctively to press against the fabric of my gray knit sweater, tracing the thick, raised contour of the surgical scar running nearly 6 inches along my lower lumbar spine. That scar was the permanent physical souvenir of a catastrophic scaffolding collapse 5 years ago. A devastating bridge construction disaster that abruptly terminated my thriving career as a senior structural engineer at 31, forcing me into early retirement and leaving me with a perpetual, dull throbbing that flared up with every autumn chill. Outside the kitchen window, the ancient oak trees lining our quiet residential street in Belle Meade, Nashville, had draped themselves in the deep burgundy and amber hues of mid-October. Leaves drifted down in slow, lazy spirals across the lawn. Marcus had loved this time of year. When he was alive, he would always wake up long before me, every single morning. I never quite understood how a former military officer turned technical researcher who stayed up reading complex engineering journals until midnight could be bright-eyed and alert at 6 o'clock. And every morning, when I shuffled into the kitchen, a small note card would be propped against the coffee maker. Sometimes it was a grocery list, sometimes a funny cartoon clipped from the morning paper. But often, it was just 3 simple words, written in his firm, confident cursive. Good morning, Audrey. For 731 days since the sudden illness took him, I still found my eyes searching for those cards every morning. It had been slipped under the front door earlier that morning, before I even came downstairs. A standard notice indicating a package was held for personal pickup. I picked it up, reading the printed details twice, but felt no particular wave of curiosity. Just last week, Chloe, Marcus's 38-year-old daughter from his first marriage, had mentioned ordering a new specialized physical therapy lumbar cushion for my back. It was likely just that. I pulled on my warm wool coat, grabbed my truck keys, and drove my 10-year-old Ford F-150 through the 11-minute route to the Charlotte Avenue post office without overthinking much of anything. The lobby smelled of old paper, rubber bands, and the familiar stale recirculated air of a government facility built in the late 80s. 2 people stood ahead of me in line. I waited patiently, checking my phone out of habit, finding no urgent messages, and slipping it back into my pocket. When I reached the front counter, the clerk who stepped forward from the back room was not one of the regular staff I usually recognized. He was an older man, perhaps 68 or 70, with a thick head of white hair and deep, weather-beaten facial lines that suggested a life spent largely outdoors. He wore a simple blue postal jacket over a flannel shirt, moving with the deliberate, unhurried ease of someone who had long since stopped rushing. "Mrs. Audrey Hayes?" he said softly. I was mildly surprised he knew my name before I'd even spoken. "That's me. I've been expecting you," he said, reaching beneath the counter to produce a small, padded parcel sealed with brown packing tape, roughly the size of a hardback book. Then, from his breast pocket, he withdrew a second item, a plain white letter-size envelope, firmly sealed. He placed both on the counter before me. "My name is Vance Miller. I'm an old colleague of Marcus." I studied the man more carefully, searching my memory of my 5 years of marriage to Marcus. "I don't believe we've ever met." "No," Vance said, a faint shadow crossing his face. Not quite sadness, nor guilt, but something residing right on the border between the two. "Marcus felt it was better to keep things quiet for a time. He entrusted me with these items and asked me to deliver them to you personally, on this exact date." My hand reached out, trembling fingers touching the paper edge of the white envelope before my brain could fully digest his words. The handwriting on the front was undeniably Marcus's. That precise, slightly left-leaning script of a man who believed how you wrote something mattered just as much as what you wrote. It bore a single word: Audrey. "When did he leave this with you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Vance hesitated, then spoke gently. "A very long time ago. He made meticulous arrangements before he left. Marcus trusted you would know exactly what to do with it." I wanted to ask more: who he was, how he knew Marcus so intimately, and what he meant by arrangements. But when I raised my eyes, Vance Miller was already stepping back with a respectful nod, disappearing behind the plastic sorting curtain. I stood frozen at the counter for a long moment, holding the sealed envelope in one hand and the weighted parcel in the other, while the clerk at the adjacent window loudly explained tracking numbers to an elderly customer. I walked out to my truck, sat down in the driver's seat, and set both items onto the passenger side, staring at them in stunned silence. The padded parcel had a solid rectangular density, feeling distinctly like a compact external hard drive. The white envelope, by contrast, was almost weightless, containing nothing except Marcus's handwriting on the front: Audrey. A continuous tremor ran through my hands as I broke the seal of the white envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Dark ink covered the page. My eyes locked onto the very first line, and the outside world, the parking lot, the midday traffic on Charlotte Avenue, the entire ordinary Tuesday morning instantly dissolved. Audrey, go to the old coffee shop alone. Don't tell Chloe. Don't tell anyone. Not until you have heard everything. I read the sentence 4 times. Don't tell Chloe. Of all the things Marcus could have written to me from beyond the grave, why would he specifically isolate his 38-year-old daughter? Why singled her out from everyone else in my life? My chest tightened with a cold, sickening sensation that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with the slow arrival of a dark realization I could not yet name. I carefully folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and pressed it against my chest with both hands. Outside, an October gust sent amber leaves skittering across the hood of my truck. Marcus had always loved this season, and somehow, impossibly, he still had something left to say to me. I drove home in a state of sheer autopilot. That is the only honest way to describe those 15 minutes. My hands held the steering wheel, my foot worked the pedals, and I stopped at red lights as required. But my mind was nowhere near the road. My thoughts were consumed by the letter in my pocket, the parcel beside me, and 5 words repeating like a broken record. Don't tell Chloe. I had raised Chloe alongside Marcus since she was 13, after her biological mother passed away. I had stayed up late helping her prepare for her corporate finance degree, stood in the front row at her graduation, and personally adjusted her academic sash. Over the 2 years since Marcus passed, Chloe had stepped up to handle his insurance policies, estate tax forms, and complex financial paperwork that a retired structural engineer like me rarely touched. She called every evening at 7, without fail. She was everything a mother could ask for. So why had Marcus explicitly warned me to beware of her? I pulled into my gravel driveway, sitting motionless in the idling truck for several minutes as I stared at the front porch of our 2-story craftsman home. I turned off the ignition, gathered both items, and walked inside. I headed straight for the home office, the room Marcus and I had built together over our 15 years of marriage. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, anchored by the heavy oak desk I refused to replace, despite its worn finish, and a framed photograph on the wall showing the 2 of us at Yellowstone in 2014, sunburned and laughing over a joke I could no longer remember. I placed the padded parcel on the desk, sat down, and peeled open the bubble wrap. Inside was a sleek black external hard drive, roughly the size of a deck of cards. Taped to the protective casing was a second note card in Marcus's handwriting. It read, "The password is the day we met." You remember, don't you? You always remembered better than you thought you did. The day we met. October 14th, 2009. I had been 21, a junior engineer supervising my first structural site inspection in Nashville. Marcus was a technical research officer overseeing bridge safety protocols, sitting in a trailer surrounded by blueprints and nursing a cold cup of coffee. I had asked if the seat across from him was taken. He had looked up with his steady gray eyes and said, "It is now." I fell completely in love with his quiet wisdom over the next 45 seconds. I plugged the drive into my laptop. A password prompt illuminated the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my throat tightening so fiercely that I had to press my fist against my lower back scar, drawing in a deliberate breath through my nose and exhaling through my mouth. A mental stabilization technique my engineering brain always relied on during structural crises. I typed 1142009. The drive unlocked instantly. The folder directory that appeared was meticulously organized, with the exact precision Marcus applied to every project he touched. Financial reports, email archives, video records, audio transcripts, and a single directory titled Read This First. My cursor drifted toward the Read This First folder, but abruptly froze. The video thumbnail image for the very first file in the main directory had finished loading, and I found myself staring directly at Marcus's face. It was not the Marcus I had last seen 2 years ago, pale, frail, and fading on an emergency hospital bed. The man in this video possessed healthy skin color and a strong, focused gaze. He was sitting in a plain room with a stark white wall behind him, looking straight into the camera lens with the intense focus he always wore when explaining a complex structural blueprint. The timestamp in the lower corner of the thumbnail read 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago! The air was instantly sucked from my lungs. Hot tears welled in my eyes, spilling down my cheeks and onto the dark oak desk. I didn't care to wipe them away, because my husband had been officially pronounced dead 2 years ago. Yet just 3 weeks ago, he was sitting before a camera with vibrant health and clear eyes. I could not comprehend what was happening, but my analytical mind warned me that after tonight, nothing in my life would ever be the same again. "Marcus," I whispered aloud to the empty office, staring at our framed photograph on the wall. My voice cracked like dry wood. "What did you do?" At that exact moment, my smartphone chimed on the desk. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, took a deep breath to steady my vocal cords, and looked at the caller ID. Chloe, my stepdaughter, who maintained her strict 7 o'clock evening check-in routine. But I glanced at the computer clock. 4:47 p.m., 2 hours and 13 minutes earlier than her usual schedule. My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked up the phone, adjusting my tone to sound calm and natural, the way I always kept my composure when addressing structural emergencies on site. "Hi, Chloe. How's your back feeling today, Mom?" Chloe's voice was warm, light, and entirely unbothered. "Listen, I was just calling to check in. Did you happen to receive any unusual mail or packages from the post office today?" My eyes shifted from the phone to the laptop screen, locking onto Marcus's face in the video thumbnail and the timestamp reading 3 weeks ago. "Just some routine tax paperwork, sweetie," I replied, keeping my voice utterly devoid of suspicion. "Nothing out of the ordinary." "Oh, that's good," Chloe said. And if I weren't sitting in this office with Marcus's unlocked drive before me, I would have believed her completely. Just checking. You know how much I worry about you." "I know you do," I said, softly. "I'll talk to you tonight." I ended the call, set the phone face down, and double-clicked the folder labeled "Read This First." The sharp autumn sunlight filtering through the timber blinds of my home office felt strangely clinical as I sat anchored to my desk chair, scrolling line by line through the meticulous financial dossiers Marcus had preserved on the external hard drive. As a former senior structural engineer, my professional career had been built on tracing stress fractures, calculating load capacities, and identifying structural fatigue in massive steel bridges. But what laid out across my laptop screen was a terrifyingly engineered blueprint of human betrayal. Over the past 14 months, Chloe, my 38-year-old stepdaughter, whom I had nurtured and guided like my own flesh and blood since she was 13, had systematically constructed a covert network of 7 shell companies registered directly to my residential address in Belmy. These paper entities were quietly billing astronomical, fictitious technology and engineering consulting fees to a corporate ecosystem controlled by Harrison Vance, a high-profile, ruthless cryptocurrency venture capitalist. Through a labyrinth of offshore accounts, unregulated digital asset exchanges, and forged wire transfer authorizations, a staggering total of $76 million had flowed through financial channels bearing my digital signature. Even more devastating was the systematic theft occurring right under my roof. My personal injury disability settlement reserve, the crucial capital set aside to cover my ongoing physical therapy, spinal stabilization procedures, and long-term medical care following the bridge collapse 5 years ago, had been quietly hollowed out by nearly 40% over 26 consecutive months. Chloe had siphoned away my life's safety net, dollar by dollar, all while maintaining her flawless routine of calling me every single evening at 7 o'clock sharp to ask with sweet, filial concern whether I had remembered to complete my daily lumbar rehabilitation stretches. The true, chilling depth of the conspiracy, however, was buried deep inside a subfolder explicitly labeled Legal and Medical Assessment. My hands trembled so violently against the dark oak desk that the mouse cursor skittered uncontrollably across the screen as I double-clicked a scanned high-resolution PDF document. What opened before my eyes was a carefully drafted, legally binding, durable financial power of attorney that granted Chloe absolute, unchallengeable authority over all my bank accounts, property deeds, investment portfolios, and medical decisions in the event I was determined to be mentally incapacitated. Attached directly behind the power of attorney was a formal psychiatric evaluation report prepared 8 months prior by a medical doctor whose name I had never once heard in my 36 years. The document painted a sinister, fabricated portrait of my mental health, describing me as exhibiting severe post-traumatic cognitive decline, chronic emotional instability, and severely diminished financial judgment stemming from neurological trauma suffered during my spinal injury. In Marcus's recorded video, his calm, authoritative voice resonated through my office speakers with a cold, righteous fury. "They have been quietly building a legal cage around you, Audrey. If the federal wire fraud scheme is ever uncovered by authorities, the paper trail has been masterfully engineered to point entirely to a confused, brain-damaged widow acting as a rogue consultant. And if you ever begin to ask questions or notice the missing funds, Chloe has the legal paperwork pre-filed and ready to have you declared mentally incompetent, stripping your rights and locking you away permanently." The sickening, paralyzing truth settled into my chest like lead. My stepdaughter wasn't merely stealing my financial security. She was methodically preparing to erase my legal existence entirely. At precisely 12 o'clock noon the following day, I sat directly across from Chloe at a quiet, upscale French bistro on West End Avenue, a favored haunt for corporate executives, featuring crisp white linen tablecloths, polished crystal glassware, and discreet waiters who refilled water glasses before they reached half empty. Chloe looked impeccably polished in a sharply tailored charcoal wool blazer, her dark hair pinned back in her signature boardroom chignon, smiling with effortless warmth as she reached across the table to gently pat the back of my hand. "You look a little pale today, Mom," she said softly, her sharp brown eyes so hauntingly similar to her late father's, studying my face with a practiced, predatory veneer of filial worry. "Are those spinal nerve spasms flaring up again? You really must let me take over the rest of your errands." I swallowed the bitter lump of ice rising in my throat, offering her a perfectly calm, practiced smile that masked the fierce analytical calculation burning behind my eyes. "I'm managing just fine, Chloe," I replied, keeping my vocal cadence light, casual, and slightly unconcerned, the exact tone of a retired, weary woman making idle afternoon small talk. Though I did happen to run across a name in an old structural engineering trade publication recently, Harrison Vance, some big tech venture capital fellow out of Atlanta. Have you ever come across his investment firm in your corporate finance work? I fixed my gaze on her face with unblinking, engineering precision. For exactly half a second, her flawless corporate mask fractured. Her right index finger froze solid against the stem of her crystal water glass. The color momentarily drained from her lips, and her pupils dilated in a fraction of a second of pure, silent panic before she forced a smooth, elegant sip. "I don't believe I've ever heard that name, Mom," she said, placing her glass back onto the tablecloth with a soft, precise click. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no particular reason," I waved my hand dismissively, smiling warmly into her eyes. "Just idle chatter." But in that microscopic half-second freeze, my structural mind had found its indisputable load-bearing proof. That very night, shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, the heavy stillness of my craftsman home was broken by a faint, deliberate metallic scraping near the back porch. A subtle, calculated pressure being applied against the heavy brass deadbolt of the kitchen door. Living alone for 2 years sharpens a person's spatial awareness, but my trained structural instincts told me instantly that this was neither the timber frame settling nor an autumn animal in the yard. I was out of bed before my conscious mind even had time to process fear, sliding the black external hard drive deep into the interior pocket of my heavy winter coat, alongside Marcus's folded letter. Moving down the dark hallway in thick woolen socks, I instinctively bypassed the exact floorboards I knew would creak, a spatial map Marcus and I had memorized when we personally rebuilt the subflooring years ago. Through the shadows of the living room, I spotted 2 dark figures moving with the quiet, methodical efficiency of trained professionals carrying low-beam tactical flashlights. Slipping silently out the side utility door into the freezing, crisp October night air, I kept my body crouched low as I navigated the perimeter of the lawn. Through the illuminated kitchen window next door, my vigilant neighbor, Vera Santos, was standing at her sink in a bright yellow bathrobe. Taking in the sight of intruders inside my house, she immediately raised her smartphone to the glass, snapping a barrage of high-resolution photographs. Remaining well below the sightline of my home's windows, I scaled the low wooden fence into the side alley, biting down hard against the sharp, agonizing flare of pain shooting up my lower spine, and reached the cold, dark sanctuary of the public street. My hands shook with adrenaline as I opened my rideshare application under the shadow of a street lamp, requesting an immediate driver to pick me up 2 blocks away. 20 minutes later, the sedan pulled up outside the Morning Bell Diner on Church Avenue, a nostalgic 24-hour establishment featuring cracked mustard yellow vinyl booths, where Marcus and I had shared our very first cup of coffee 17 years ago. The small brass bell above the door chimed softly as I pushed through the glass. The rich, comforting aromas of dark roast coffee and bacon grease wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. Sitting in the far corner booth, the exact booth Marcus and I had claimed on that crisp October afternoon in 2009, was Vance Miller, the silver-haired postal clerk who had delivered the sealed envelope to me that morning. Sitting directly across from him was a woman in her late 30s with remarkably sharp, composed eyes, wearing a dark, tailored navy blazer and carrying an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. Vance stood up immediately as I approached, gesturing warmly for me to take the inner seat. "Audrey, thank God you made it here safely," he said, his voice laced with immense relief. "This is Special Agent Sarah Vance from the FBI Nashville Field Office. We have been waiting for you." Agent Vance extended a firm, reassuring hand across the table, her eyes filled with deep, resolute professional empathy. "Mrs. Hayes," Agent Vance said quietly, "your husband began building this federal case alongside us 18 months ago. It is time we bring you fully into the operation." Inside the warm hum of the Morning Bell Diner, the clinking of heavy ceramic mugs and the low chatter of late-night truck drivers faded into background noise as Special Agent Sarah Vance opened a thick leather case file on the mustard yellow table. She laid out a sequence of official government documents, turning them so I could read every line under the soft amber diner lights. "Mrs. Hayes, I know the past 48 hours have felt like an impossible, disorienting nightmare," Agent Vance began, her voice carrying a calm, unshakable authority that immediately anchored my racing mind. "To understand why Marcus had to disappear 2 years ago, you must first understand the legal mechanics of how federal witness protection operates in complex financial crimes. 18 months before he was reported deceased, Marcus discovered that his late ex-wife's daughter, Chloe, had integrated herself into a massive $76 million offshore money laundering apparatus run by Harrison Vance. When Marcus realized they were setting up your name and digital signatures as the ultimate fall guy, he didn't just go to local law enforcement. He walked straight into our Federal Bureau of Investigation field office. However, when our surveillance revealed that Chloe had forged medical documents to deny Marcus's life-saving treatments and was actively preparing to accelerate his demise to seize control of your estate, we faced a critical crisis. If Marcus had simply stayed at home, they would have ended his life or erased the evidence before a federal indictment could be secured. So, with the emergency authorization of a federal judge and the discreet cooperation of your family physician, Dr. Patricia Hale, we placed Marcus into the Federal Emergency Witness Protection Program, protective custody. His reported passing was a controlled legal fiction executed under federal seal to keep him alive, protect you and your son Leo from immediate harm, and buy us the time required to build a bulletproof federal case. My fingers trembled violently as Agent Vance reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, portable digital audio player, placing a set of clear earphones on the table beside my cold coffee mug. "Marcus recorded this for you 4 days ago in our Knoxville safe house," she whispered gently. "He wanted you to hear the truth in his own words, not through a government report." With shaking hands, I inserted the earbuds and pressed play. Instantly, the familiar, warm, resonant voice of my husband filled my ears. Not the frail, fading whisper of a dying man on a hospital bed, but the strong, clear voice of the man I had loved for 15 years. "Audrey, my brave, brilliant Audrey," Marcus began, his tone thick with profound emotion. "If you are listening to this, it means Vance Miller has safely delivered the hard drive, and you are sitting with Agent Vance. I need you to know that leaving you in the dark for 2 long years was the most agonizing, soul-crushing decision I have ever made in my entire life. There were nights in that safe house when the urge to drive back to Belme, walk through our front door, and hold you in my arms almost drove me out of my mind. I watched you from afar through secure updates. I saw you struggle to learn how to manage the house alone. I saw you sit on the back porch staring at my empty reading chair. And I heard how you talked to my photograph when you thought no one was listening.
But Audrey, if I had reached out to you, Chloe's monitoring software on your phone would have alerted Harrison Vance instantly. They would have destroyed the paper trail, executed their forged power of attorney, and committed you to an asylum before we could strike. I had to let you grieve so that I could build a fortress of evidence strong enough to protect your freedom and secure Leo's future. I am not dead, my love. I am right here, and I am coming home to you soon.
Hot, silent tears spilled over my eyelashes, washing away 2 years of unbearable sorrow and replacing it with an overwhelming, fierce wave of hope. When the audio recording ended, I pulled the earbuds out, my chest heaving with gasping, silent sobs as I pressed the heels of both hands hard against my face. Agent Vance did not rush me. She simply pushed a paper napkin across the table and waited with quiet, profound respect while I gathered my composure. When I finally lowered my hands and wiped my eyes, Agent Vance met my gaze with a steady, meaningful look. "Marcus came back to Nashville 4 days ago," she said softly, gesturing toward the rain-slicked window overlooking Church Avenue. "He knew you would be retrieving the drive today, and he refused to stay in Knoxville any longer. Look across the street, Audrey." My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt it in my temples as I turned my head to look through the diner window. Standing on the opposite sidewalk, beneath the warm, amber glow of a street lamp in the misty October rain, was a tall figure wearing a dark navy wool coat with the collar turned up against the cold wind. His hair was slightly shorter than I remembered, but the set of his broad shoulders, his posture, and the intense, loving gaze fixed directly on the diner window were unmistakable. It was Marcus. He was standing 30 feet away in the night, staring through the glass at me with an expression so full of longing, pain, and fierce, unconditional love that my knees almost buckled beneath the table. For 3 breathless seconds, our eyes locked across the rain-soaked asphalt. 2 years of grief and separation compressing into a single transcendent moment of recognition. I scrambled out of the vinyl booth, my instincts screaming at me to push through the diner doors and throw my arms around my husband. But before I could take 2 steps, Agent Vance's firm hand gently grasped my forearm. "Wait, Audrey, look at the dark sedan parked at the corner," she warned in a low, sharp whisper. Following her gaze, my engineering mind immediately registered a dark Ford Crown Victoria idling in the shadows 50 yards down Church Avenue. Sitting in the driver's seat was Detective Ray Marrow, a corrupt, veteran local police officer on Harrison Vance's corporate payroll who had been assigned to keep surveillance on my movements. Across the street, Marcus had spotted the suspicious vehicle at the exact same moment. He knew instantly that if he walked across the street and embraced me, Marrow's dashboard camera would capture his face, revealing to Chloe and Vance within the hour that Marcus was alive, destroying 18 months of federal wiretap setup and putting our 20-year-old son, Leo, in immediate danger. With incredible tactical composure, Marcus gave me one final, deep, lingering look, a silent promise that echoed directly into my soul, and then deliberately stepped backward into the shadowy mouth of a narrow side alley, drawing Morrow's vehicle away from the diner as the sedan slowly pulled away to follow his trail. Marcus hadn't run away out of fear. He had drawn the predator's gaze away from me, sacrificing his own safety once again to keep the trap secure. Returning to the booth, my hands were no longer shaking from fear or grief. They had gone completely still, settled into the cold, calculated focus of a structural engineer preparing to collapse a compromised structure. "Tell me what we need to do next, Agent Vance," I said, my voice remarkably steady and sharp. Agent Vance smiled faintly, approving of the sudden, fierce transformation in my posture. She reached into her briefcase and produced a specialized, ultra-compact burner smartphone, a non-metallic device stripped of all standard commercial tracking features. "We know Chloe and Vance are getting desperate," Agent Vance explained, her voice dropping into an urgent operational tone. "Harrison Vance realizes our federal team is closing in, and Morrow just reported that he temporarily lost sight of your location. They are going to escalate their timeline. Take this burner phone. It operates on an encrypted, untraceable federal frequency." I took the small device, immediately opening the secure messaging interface. Using my analytical memory, I typed out a single encrypted emergency message and sent it directly to my 20-year-old son, Leo, who was currently staying at his college dormitory across town. "Leo, this is Mom. I am safe with federal authorities. Do not go near Chloe's office. Do not answer her calls, and keep this secure number stored in your phone. If anything unusual happens, contact me on this line instantly. I love you." Sinking back into the booth as the encrypted message delivered, I knew the final phase of our fight had officially begun. While I sat inside the Morning Bell Diner, coordinating our next moves with Agent Vance, my 20-year-old son, Leo, was experiencing his own terrifying awakening on the 14th floor of the Commerce Street building in downtown Nashville. Leo, an observant sophomore majoring in mechanical engineering at Vanderbilt University, had grown increasingly uneasy over the previous 72 hours. He had noticed subtle, disturbing discrepancies in Chloe's behavior. Most notably, her sudden, aggressive inquiries about my daily physical rehabilitation routines, and her frantic attempts to locate our family's original property deeds. Trusting the instincts his father had instilled in him, Leo used a spare office key Chloe had given him months ago for emergency errands and let himself into her executive suite at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. The atmosphere inside the corner office was suffocatingly cold and impersonal. Unlike every other professional workspace he had ever visited, Chloe's desk lacked a single framed family photograph for personal keepsake, featuring only a polished brass Newton's cradle clicking rhythmically in the air-conditioned draft. Opening the bottom drawer of her locked filing cabinet, Leo discovered a thick hanging folder labeled with Chloe's neat block lettering. Estate resolved. The word resolved sent a chill down his spine. Estates were meant to be administered or distributed, whereas resolution implied a problem that had been calculatedly eliminated. Inside, Leo uncovered a terrifying paper trail, a forged treatment authorization form from Vanderbilt Medical Center dated 2 months before Marcus's reported death, bearing a copied signature where Marcus allegedly declined enrollment in a promising, life-saving oncology trial. Even more damning was a printed thread of encrypted text messages between Chloe and a contact saved only as Dr. F, discussing how any deviation from their timeline created unwanted risk, and confirming that Chloe would handle the fraudulent authorization herself because she had done this before. As Leo's hands shook while reading through the forged psychiatric evaluation declaring me mentally incompetent, he realized with sickening clarity that his older stepsister was not merely managing family affairs. She was methodically orchestrating the legal and physical destruction of their parents. Leo spun around, knocking the Newton's cradle sideways, to find Chloe standing in the doorway framed by the fluorescent hall light. She wore her charcoal wool blazer with her arms crossed loosely over her chest, her face completely devoid of surprise, anger, or alarm. She looked at her 20-year-old stepbrother with the chilling, detached composure of an executive reviewing an unexpected line item on a quarterly ledger. "Find what you were looking for, Leo?" she asked, her voice flat, even, and entirely devoid of emotion.
Leo's voice cracked with raw fury and betrayal as he held up the forged medical declining form. Chloe, what is this? Mom's signature? Dad's medical trials? You forged these! You let Dad suffer, and you're trying to lock Mom away in an institution! Chloe stepped into the room, locking the heavy oak door behind her with a soft, definitive click that echoed like a vault sealing shut.
"Hand over your phone, Leo," she commanded quietly, her tone carrying no more heat than a weather forecast. "I am not going to ask you twice." When Leo instinctively reached into his pocket to dial my number, two large, muscular men in dark suits, Harrison Vance's private security contractors, stepped out from the adjoining conference room, blocking his path. Within seconds, they disarmed the young college student, forcing him into a leather armchair, while Chloe picked up his cell phone. She opened his messaging app, her eyes locking onto the encrypted text I had sent him from Agent Vance's burner phone just minutes prior. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Chloe's face as she realized she now possessed the direct, untraceable communication channel to my location. Instead of panicking over Leo's discovery, she immediately recognized an unprecedented opportunity to leverage my youngest child as the ultimate bargaining chip. At precisely 11 o'clock that evening, the burner phone resting on the limestone table inside my sanctuary vibrated with a sharp, insistent hum. Agent Vance, Julian Reed, and I were gathered inside a secluded, subterranean choir room beneath the First Presbyterian Church of Nashville, a historic structure whose 18-inch solid limestone walls provided complete immunity against external electronic eavesdropping and signal interception. I picked up the small, non-metallic device, pressing it to my ear with a steady hand. "Hello, Audrey," Chloe's voice came through the speaker, terrifyingly pleasant, relaxed, and conversational, as if she were calling for her routine 7 o'clock check-in. "You've been remarkably resourceful these past 48 hours, Mom. I must admit, I underestimated your engineering mind. But playing hide-and-seek with federal agents ends tonight." My heart seized in my chest, but I maintained absolute vocal control. "Where is Leo, Chloe?" A calculated, deliberate pause echoed over the line before Chloe responded. "He's right here beside me, perfectly comfortable and unharmed. He was a bit dramatic earlier when he went through my private office files, but we've reached an understanding. Would you like to hear his voice?" A brief rustle followed, and then Leo's voice came through, low, tight, and strained with the immense effort it took not to break down. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I found the documents in her office about Dad and your medical records. I tried to get away, but... Leo, listen to me very carefully, sweetheart," I interrupted, my voice cutting through his panic with fierce, unshakable maternal strength. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were brave, you were right, and none of this is your fault. Do you hear me? Stay calm. I am coming to get you." Chloe's voice abruptly cut back in, stripping away all pretense of affection. "Here are the terms, Audrey. You will bring the external hard drive, along with all master passwords and cloud access credentials, to an address I am about to text you. You will come completely alone at precisely 1 o'clock in the morning. You will not involve Sarah Vance. You will not bring FBI tactical units, and you will not notify law enforcement. If I spot a single police vehicle, the psychiatric evaluation and forged power of attorney go to a county judge at dawn, and Leo's future will be permanently dismantled. Come alone, Mom." The line went completely dead. Lowering the phone onto the oak table, I met Agent Vance's sharp, questioning gaze. "She has Leo," I said flatly, the terror in my heart instantly transforming into a cold, lethal clarity. She wants me at an address in Franklin at 1 a.m, alone with the hard drive. Julian Reed, my 28-year-old former engineering protege who had joined our operation hours earlier, immediately opened his ruggedized laptop and pulled up the Williamson County property tax database. As he entered the Franklin address Chloe had transmitted, his eyes widened in sudden recognition. "Mrs. Hayes? Look at this," Julian urged, turning the high-resolution screen toward me. The database displayed a massive 20-acre gated estate belonging to Harrison Vance, complete with an itemized municipal building permit from 2011. My eyes locked onto the primary consulting engineer listed on the original security architecture installation, Audrey R. Hayes, Senior Structural Engineer, Meridian Systems. A sudden, powerful surge of memory flooded my mind. 15 years ago, long before Harrison Vance was under federal investigation, his development firm had hired my engineering company to design and install the estate's primary structural and electronic security grid. I had personally calculated the load thresholds, mapped the subterranean utility corridors, and designed the master control architecture for the entire compound. "I built that entire security framework from the ground up," I whispered, a fierce, triumphant smile touching my lips for the first time in days. Every sensor, every motorized perimeter lock, every surveillance relay, and every power junction box. And because Harrison Vance insisted on a proprietary, non-networked system to prevent outside hacking, he never updated the core firmware or hired an outside firm to audit the architecture. My master engineering backdoor protocol, the failsafe I designed into the central control module 15 years ago, is still sitting inside his system, completely untouched. The realization transformed our entire tactical posture, from a desperate rescue attempt into a calculated precision trap. Julian's fingers flew across his keyboard as he interfaced his specialized hardware with the legacy access parameters I provided from memory, establishing a remote connection bridge to the estate's central control module. "Once you cross the threshold and establish local proximity, Mrs. Hayes," Julian explained, his eyes fixed on the system diagnostic bars, "this modified shoe insert transmitter will link directly to my mobile relay station parked outside the perimeter fence. When you apply pressure to the concealed heel switch, it won't just trigger an alarm. It will execute an immediate, hard system override. In less than 4 seconds, the primary power grid will collapse, the auxiliary emergency red lighting will engage, every motorized exterior exit will mechanically bolt shut, and the encrypted video feed from Vance's internal security cameras will stream live to Agent Vance's Federal Tactical Command vehicle." Agent Vance stood up, pulling her dark tactical jacket over her sidearm, her eyes gleaming with fierce professional resolve. "Judge Patricia Hensley signed an emergency federal search and arrest warrant 30 minutes ago," Agent Vance declared, checking the magazine of her weapon. "Harrison Vance believes he controls the timeline and the environment tonight. He has no idea he is inviting the lead architect of his own prison straight through his front door. We leave for Franklin in 5 minutes." I stood up beside her, lacing my boots firmly over the concealed transmitter insert, my lower back pain completely forgotten. 15 years ago, I had built Harrison Vance's fortress of greed. Tonight, I was going to tear it down to save my son. The midnight drive to Franklin unspooled along Interstate 65 South through 38 tense, silent minutes of the quiet, dark Tennessee countryside. Inside Agent Vance's high-tech tactical command vehicle, the atmosphere was suffocatingly heavy with anticipation, yet grounded by the methodical, unhurried preparation of a seasoned federal operation team. Julian Reed sat in the back seat with his ruggedized field laptop open, his fingers moving across the illuminated mechanical keyboard in a rhythmic, practiced cadence as he finalized the complex remote handshake protocol connecting our mobile transmitter to the estate's legacy security network. He narrated his technical progress in the calm, concentrated tone of a lead surgeon describing a critical incision to his surgical staff. The legacy security architecture running on Vance's central control module relies on an unpatched 2011 firmware version that completely lacks modern multi-layered authentication or real-time intrusion detection. Your original master engineering backdoor protocol acts as a valid, unchallengeable master authority credential because the proprietary system was never instructed to revoke or overwrite the initial system administrator accounts. The exact instant your foot presses down on that concealed heel switch inside your left boot, the override signal will transmit directly to my mobile relay station, parked just outside the perimeter fence line. In precisely 3.8 seconds, the main electrical grid drops, the auxiliary red emergency lighting engages, every exterior motorized deadbolt locks mechanically into place, and the encrypted internal camera feeds dump straight to Agent Vance's tactical server for real-time recording. I sat quietly in the front passenger seat, carefully tightening the leather laces of my boots over the hollowed composite shoe insert housing the microscopic non-metallic transmitter. The dull, perpetual throbbing in my lower lumbar spine, which had served as an unavoidable physical reminder of my devastating bridge collapse 5 years ago, seemed to dissolve entirely into distant background noise, eclipsed completely by the fierce, protective adrenaline of a mother stepping directly into the predator's den to reclaim her child. Leaving Agent Vance's tactical vehicle hidden 300 yards down a cedar-lined gravel driveway, I walked the remaining distance toward Harrison Vance's sprawling mansion alone, beneath the crisp, starlit October sky. The estate loomed dramatically out of the darkness, a massive 20-acre converted timber frame structure whose warm exterior lanterns and floodlights gave the deceptive impression of old Southern wealth, architectural elegance, and peaceful domesticity. Behind me in the dense tree line, Agent Vance's federal SWAT team was silently maneuvering into tactical perimeter positions, while a secondary assault unit waited at the western service entrance. As I climbed the heavy limestone porch steps, a massive, stone-faced private security guard stepped out from the deep shadows, holding out his gloved hand without uttering a single word of greeting. I handed him my primary smartphone without the slightest hint of resistance or hesitation. He ran a heavy-duty electronic sweep wand over my wool coat, across my torso, and down both of my legs, thorough and methodical, yet entirely ineffective against the non-metallic composite casing engineered inside the heel of my leather boot. Satisfied I was carrying no conventional metallic weapons or recording devices, he unlocked the heavy oak front door and gestured for me to step inside. The non-metallic burner transmitter in my left shoe remained completely undetected, and as the heavy door shut behind me with a solid, echoing thud, my engineering mind automatically registered every structural detail, timber beam placement and wiring conduit of the grand entryway I had personally helped draft 15 years ago. The main living hall was a cavernous, open-concept space featuring massive, exposed timber trusses, a soaring floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace, and an entire wall of live cryptocurrency market displays, glowing in restless, shifting green and red numerals. Chloe stood near the center of the polished hardwood room in her dark charcoal blazer, her hands clasped calmly in front of her, maintaining her polished corporate posture, as if she were hosting a routine executive board meeting or addressing corporate investors. Beside her, held firmly by 2 muscular private security contractors, stood my 20-year-old son, Leo. Seeing me walk through the door, Leo's eyes widened with a sudden, overwhelming mixture of terror, profound relief, and fierce, protective anger. "Mom, you shouldn't have come here alone! They're insane!" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he struggled against the guard's iron grip. I locked my eyes onto my son, offering him a perfectly calm, unshakable smile that carried 15 years of unconditional maternal love. "I told you I was coming for you, Leo. Everything is going to be all right, sweetheart." Chloe stepped forward, her vocal cadence chillingly pleasant, smooth
and utterly devoid of remorse or filial affection. "Thank you for being so punctual, Mom. Hand over the external hard drive and the master cloud decryption keys, and Leo walks out the front door completely unharmed." I looked at my stepdaughter, looking past her polished corporate mask into the tragic, hollow emptiness of her ambition. "You built an entire empire of fraud and deceit on my name and your father's memory, Chloe. And you were willing to destroy the family that raised and loved you just to keep your illusion from crumbling." Before Chloe could articulate a response, the heavy oak double doors leading to the west corridor swung open, and Harrison Vance stepped into the room holding a crystal tumbler of single malt scotch. Taller than I had pictured from his corporate files, with silver-streaked hair, a tailored Italian suit, and an unhurried, predatory confidence. Vance looked at me with the casual detachment of a man who believed every room he entered belonged entirely to him.
Audrey Hayes," Vance said, his smooth, resonant voice echoing through the high-ceilinged hall. "The brilliant structural engineer who built this fine fortress 15 years ago. It seems profoundly poetic that your family story concludes inside the very structure you designed." He turned his gaze toward Chloe, his smile turning cold, sharp, and dismissive, as he addressed her as if she were merely a piece of disposable corporate machinery. "You were remarkably useful, Chloe. But once a door has served its operational purpose, it becomes an inconvenient liability." Chloe's face fractured for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of pure, horrified shock as the brutal reality washed over her that the man she had sacrificed her integrity, her family, and her soul for viewed her as nothing more than a temporary, expendable tool. Vance raised his right hand slightly, nodding toward his armed guards. "Eliminate the paper trail. All of it." Hearing those words, I didn't flinch, step back, or cry out in fear. Instead, I shifted my weight backward, planting my left heel firmly into the dark hardwood floor, driving my full body weight down onto the concealed contact switch inside my boot. The physical reaction was instantaneous, violent, and absolute. Across the entire 20-acre compound, my master engineering backdoor protocol executed with ruthless precision efficiency. The primary electrical grid died instantly, snuffing out the grand chandeliers, the accent lamps, and the restless green and red crypto displays. A fraction of a second later, the auxiliary emergency red crisis lighting kicked in, flooding the cavernous room in a deep, eerie crimson glow that drained all warmth and natural color from the space. Simultaneously, heavy steel motorized deadbolts slammed shut across every exterior door and window shutter with a deafening mechanical roar that echoed like rifle fire, locking every single exit from the outside. "What the hell did you do to my security system?" Vance screamed, his suave, aristocratic composure instantly shattering as he frantically struck the dead wall panel override, which remained completely dark and unresponsive. "Your override will never work, Vance," I said, my voice echoing through the crimson room with absolute engineering authority. "I designed the central control module 15 years ago, and I built the master key into its foundational architecture." Before his guards could draw their sidearms, the heavy Western service entrance was breached with a thunderous crash, and Agent Vance's FBI SWAT team poured into the red-lit room with assault rifles raised, their tactical lights blinding the room. Within 12 seconds, Vance's guards were pinned against the hardwood floor in handcuffs, and Harrison Vance was forced to his knees. As Agent Vance read Vance his Miranda rights, the main double doors were unlocked from the outside, and Marcus stepped through the threshold into the red light. Chloe froze, her eyes widening in paralyzing, total terror as she stared at her father, alive, whole, and standing beside the woman she had tried to destroy. As Marcus stepped through the heavy double doors into the crimson-drenched living hall, the sheer impossibility of his physical presence struck Chloe with the devastating, paralyzing force of a concussive blow. For 38 years, my stepdaughter had meticulously constructed her entire identity around absolute control, cold calculation, and an unshakable corporate composure. But in that single, shattering moment, every defensive layer of her carefully engineered facade disintegrated completely. She stared at her father, the man she had cold-bloodedly plotted to deny life-saving medical treatment, the man whose hard-earned estate she had systematically looted, and the man she firmly believed had been reduced to ashes 2 agonizing years prior. A horrific, guttural sound escaped her trembling lips, a fractured, breathless gasp that contained neither coherent words nor rational thought, but simply the raw, primal realization that her entire empire of deceit had just collapsed upon her. Marcus did not yell, nor did he offer any theatrical expressions of rage or vindication. He simply stopped a few feet away from her, his broad shoulders squared in the red emergency light, looking down at his eldest daughter with an expression of profound, unbearable sorrow that only a parent betrayed by their own flesh and blood could truly comprehend. "I know absolutely everything you did, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying a tragic weight that echoed louder than any shout in the cavernous, silent room. "I know exactly what you traded your soul for, and I know exactly what it has finally cost you." That absolute, unwavering certainty in his voice severed the last remaining thread of Chloe's psychological defense. Her legs, trembling violently under the crushing weight of her sudden, catastrophic reality, finally gave out. She collapsed to her knees on the polished hardwood floor, pressing both hands tightly over her face as she let out a ragged, agonizing sob that entirely stripped away her ruthless executive persona. Agent Vance's tactical team moved in with clinical, impersonal efficiency, pulling Chloe to her feet and securing her wrists in heavy steel handcuffs. As the federal agents led her out of the estate, alongside a handcuffed Harrison Vance, she did not look back at me, nor did she look at Leo. Her eyes remained fixed on the floor, a tragic testament to a brilliant mind entirely consumed and destroyed by its own unrestrained ambition. The exact moment the heavy oak doors closed behind the federal agents, sealing the criminals outside into the flashing blue and red lights of the tactical perimeter, the suffocating, lethal tension inside the mansion instantly evaporated. Leo was the first to move. Breaking away from the spot where he had been held hostage just moments before, my 20-year-old son lunged forward, closing the distance in 3 long strides before burying his face deep into his father's chest. Marcus caught him effortlessly, wrapping his strong, familiar arms around the boy who had grown into a remarkable young man over the past 2 years of agonizing separation. "I've got you, Leo," Marcus whispered fiercely, his own voice cracking under the immense emotional gravity of the moment as he buried his face in our son's dark hair. "I've got you, son. You're completely safe now." I stood a few feet away, my heart pounding a frantic, joyful, and completely unrestrained rhythm against my ribs, watching the 2 most important men in my life holding on to each other, as if they were trying to anchor themselves to the very earth. Then, Marcus slowly lifted his head, his tear-filled, steadfast gray eyes finding mine across the crimson-lit room. The physical distance between us was merely 10 feet, but it represented a vast, impossible ocean of grief, simulated death, and unimaginable personal sacrifice. I didn't walk. I practically ran into his open arms. When Marcus pulled me against his chest,
The familiar, comforting scent of him, cedarwood and rain, flooded my senses, instantly overriding the trauma, the betrayal, and the sheer terror of the past 48 hours. My hands gripped the fabric of his dark wool coat with desperate, bruising force, as if terrified that if I let go, the universe might find a cruel way to snatch him back into the shadows.
"You're real," I sobbed quietly into his shoulder. The heavy, rigid armor of my structural engineering composure finally melting away into the soft, vulnerable relief of a wife who had just gotten her entire world back. "We made it, Audrey," Marcus murmured against my temple, his warm breath sending a tremor of profound, absolute healing down my spine. "The storm is over, my brilliant love. We are finally going home." 6 months after that harrowing October night in Franklin, the ancient dogwood trees lining the streets outside the Clifford Davis Federal Building in downtown Nashville were in full, magnificent spring bloom. The vibrant white and pink petals stood in stark, beautiful contrast to the solemn, heavy limestone architecture of the courthouse, where the final, definitive chapter of our nightmare was being written. Inside the hushed, wood-paneled courtroom, Judge Patricia Hensley presided over the sentencing hearings with a stern, unyielding judicial authority. The overwhelming mountain of federal evidence we had provided, combined with the undeniable real-time audio and video surveillance captured during my backdoor network override, had left the high-priced defense attorneys with absolutely no room to negotiate. The sentences were delivered with absolute, crushing finality. Harrison Vance received life in federal prison without the possibility of parole for orchestrating a massive syndicate of wire fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. Detective Ray Morrow, the corrupt local officer who had relentlessly shadowed my every move, was handed a 20-year sentence with a strict recommendation against early release. Then came Chloe. As she stood silently before the judge, wearing a standard-issue beige prison uniform that had entirely erased her former corporate glamour, my heart ached with a complicated, inescapable maternal sorrow. I had helped raise her. I had loved her with the specific, enormous capacity that does not require a child to be flawless. But true love and accountability are not mutually exclusive concepts. And the devastating consequences of her calculated betrayals were inescapable. Judge Hensley looked down from the high bench, her voice echoing through the silent gallery as she sentenced Chloe Hayes to 35 years in a federal penitentiary. Chloe's shoulders barely moved, but the devastating weight of the number visibly crushed the last remaining remnants of her defiance. Before the federal marshals escorted her through the side door to begin her decades of confinement, she turned her head and looked directly at Marcus. It was a fleeting 3-second exchange across the crowded courtroom, completely devoid of spoken words, yet overflowing with a lifetime of profound regret, fractured love, and irreversible choices. Marcus held her gaze steadily, offering no absolution, but masking none of his sorrow, until the heavy wooden door finally clicked shut, officially severing her from our lives. We drove back to our Craftsman home in Belmy under the warm, golden light of a perfect April afternoon, leaving the heavy, oppressive shadows of the federal courthouse far behind us. The 10-year-old Ford F-150 hummed a familiar, comforting tune as I turned into our gravel driveway, parking beneath the sprawling canopy of the ancient oak tree that had faithfully watched over our family for a decade and a half. Stepping out of the truck, Marcus paused on the front brick walkway, taking a deep, reverent breath of the fragrant spring air as he looked up at the home he had not been permitted to approach for 2 agonizing years. When I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, the interior was flooded with brilliant natural sunlight, illuminating the polished hardwood floors and the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves in our shared home office. The oppressive, heavy silence that had haunted these rooms during his absence had been completely washed away, replaced by the vibrant, living energy of a home that had finally been restored to its rightful, harmonious state. We walked together into the kitchen, where Marcus reached up to the highest shelf of the pantry, retrieving a small, unvarnished cedar box that had remained securely hidden behind a stack of thick winter blankets. He brought it to the oak dining table, the very spot where I had sat shivering with his cryptic letter just 6 months ago, and gently undid the small brass clasp. Inside, resting peacefully on a square of folded velvet cloth, was my original gold wedding band. On the dark day he entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, I had taken it off, unable to bear the daily physical reminder of my perceived widowhood. Marcus picked up the delicate gold ring, the metal worn beautifully smooth by 15 years of shared history, and reached across the table for my left hand. His fingers were warm and remarkably steady as he slid the band back onto my ring finger. It settled into place with a profound, undeniable sense of rightness, a physical manifestation of a bond that not even the darkest depths of greed and deception could permanently sever. Looking back on this grueling, transformative chapter of our family's history, I realize now that human relationships, much like the physical bridges and soaring structures I spent my career engineering, are entirely subject to invisible stress fractures and hidden vulnerabilities. I had trusted my stepdaughter too completely, viewing her through the blinding, forgiving lens of a mother's unconditional love, utterly failing to calculate the catastrophic weight of her hidden ambitions and the toxic architecture she was quietly building around us. I had to learn the hardest, most painful lesson of all, that love, without the vital structural reinforcement of wisdom and clear boundaries, is simply an open door for exploitation. Yet, this profound, heartbreaking betrayal also taught me the extraordinary, unyielding resilience of the human spirit. Marcus's incredible, selfless sacrifice, enduring 2 years of total isolation to meticulously build a fortress of legal protection around Leo and me, demonstrated a caliber of devotion that defies ordinary comprehension. The suffocating darkness that Harrison Vance and Chloe brought into our lives was ultimately dismantled not by brute force, but by patience, intellect, and the unbreakable solidarity of a family fighting for each other. Today, when I sit on our back porch with Marcus, sipping hot coffee and watching Leo study under the shade of the oak trees, I no longer feel the phantom aches of my past traumas. The physical scar on my lower spine remains, just as the emotional scars of Chloe's betrayal will never fully vanish, but they no longer compromise or define the integrity of my foundation. We survived the collapse, we reinforced our core, and we rebuilt our sanctuary stronger than it ever was before. If there is one enduring truth you take away from our story, let it be this. The most impenetrable fortresses in this world are not constructed from steel, concrete, or proprietary security codes. They are forged in the quiet, unshakable loyalty of the people who choose to stand by your side when the lights finally go out.